Welcome! In this video we're going to be going over the recently added legendary Elune Reda. She's legendary grade debuffer class. At 6 stars level 60 she has pretty decent HP at 25.2k with an attack at 5.6 and her PDEF and MDEF at 3k and 2.9. Her attack speed at 110 makes her a very fast Elune, so she will be able to get those debuffs off quickly. And boy, does she have some nice debuffs. As she is transcended up to the max, at +6 her HP does go up to a pretty nice 45k, with her attack being a very high 10k, and her PDEF and MDEF sitting around 4.5 and 4.3k. Let's take a look at these skills now. The first skill is an AoE attack, meaning that it hits all enemies every time. This is very similar to Mikazuki's first skill 2 that also attacks all enemies. This means that the damage is reduced, but it is an AoE, so it's hitting everybody, so overall the damage is really high. As the skill is leveled up to the max at +6, the damage does go up to a pretty decent 540 plus 74% of attack, but this combined with her passives and stuff still makes her a very devastating Elune even with the lower multipliers. Looking at the skill gem sets for this one, the skill gem for this is going to be Red Violent, which is going to be for physical damage and speed. The effect that you get from the set is a 5% chance to paralyze for 1 turn. This skill doesn't really do much else, but it does work with her passives well, so you can go ahead and focus on doing other damage with this, perhaps maybe orange for crit rate or more red for just more damage. You don't necessarily need to go with the 5% chance to paralyze, as she already has some good CC built into her other skills and passives. Moving on to the next skill, the special skill. This again is an AoE skill. She's going to be a very good AoE cleaver. This one is a 4-soul skill. This one hits 2 times, dealing physical damage equal to 100 plus 80% at level 1. It also will inflict a nature effect that does frostbite for 2 turns, and if they already have frostbite, then it will freeze them for 2 turns. This is very good. Frostbite is a very nice DOT type skill, meaning that it'll do soul damage whenever they take turns. The freeze is a good CC control skill and can work very nicely because it can slow down the enemy or just reduce the number of turns that they get by freezing them up and controlling them. As the skill is leveled up, the damage does go up to a decent 830 plus 112%, but it is still not too high. But the main effect from this is that you get a 3-turn frostbite or a 3-turn freeze if they already have frostbite. This means that you can control the entire team for a very long time, because it allows her to freeze them and keep them frozen almost indefinitely, as she will be applying frostbites to the enemy all the time and then freezing them again and again. This makes her very good at controlling an enemy team because she can just keep spamming these skills, pretty much making her better than a Nika in most cases for control, as she'll be able to keep doing this. The skill gem set effect on this one is a 5% chance to despair the target for 2 turns. Not a bad debuff, but the 5% chance is very low, so it's not really worth going for it. The Red Violent again on this one is for physical damage and speed. You can go ahead and opt for this one if you want that chance to despair, but you could also go just for more damage, like with an additional red or perhaps even a crit rate orange one, just to give her more damage. Moving to her ultimate skill, again, this is an AoE, meaning that all of her skills are AoE attacks. This is something to keep in mind if you're trying to avoid AoE attacking enemies if you can't control them very well, and you're afraid of perhaps maybe an Artemil revenging you. It is something to keep in mind that that all of her skills will be AoEs, and she will always be hitting everything, so if you put something to sleep, it will be woken up by her. This skill attacks 3 times, deals a total of 170 plus 135% of her attack as physical damage to all enemies. As her attack is very high, she does have lower multipliers, this being the case on this one too. This one, though, will deal soul damage equal to 22% of the enemy's max HP if they are frozen. The soul damage doubles if the enemy's level or grade is lower than that of Reda. In other words, if they have, I believe grade would be the like epic or something grade, or if their level is lower, so if it's like, you know, if they're not max leveled or something, or perhaps if they're not max transcendence or something, then you can double the soul damage, making it equal to 44% of their max HP. This doesn't work on bosses, as it says, and it can't exceed a value that is double the current attack, which means if you buffer with, say, a way buff for the attack, then she gets her attack up, which means she can do a pretty significant amount of damage. But this is also a limiting factor, because if she doesn't have the attack buff, or even with the attack buff and she doesn't have very high attack, because even with her base attack at 10k, you can get her up to a pretty easy 20k with gear and other just boosts and stuff to her stats. So getting her up to 20k attack, doubling it with a way is 40k, meaning that she can go up to 80k damage anyway. So it's going to be a significant amount of damage that she can do potentially anyway with a fairly easy way to build it. The skill, though, when it is leveled up to the max at +6, though, the damage and the multiplier doesn't go up to an insane amount. It's decent, but only, you know, 189% of attack, so it's not going to be low. But the main damage of this skill is going to be that soul damage, because the soul damage will go through barriers, invincibility, it'll go through whatever is there to protect the enemy, so it'll always do massive damage, and it doesn't care about things like the Wei will put up her buff to, you know, boost defenses and stuff. This will just soul damage just completely ignores all of that. It'll just do a fixed kind of ignore defense type damage equal to this, so the 44%. Now they have to be frozen for this to take effect. In other words, they have to have the freeze effect on them, so it's not something you're going to probably want to use turn 1 unless you can freeze the enemies otherwise. But this again can double the amount of damage that it does based on that. So that's up to potentially 88% of their max HP on every unit as soul damage, and they can't avoid it. So this is going to be a very good cleave type unit. Now the skill gem effect for this one too is also quite nice, as the main damage from this is going to be from the soul damage. You don't need to build it on high physical damage or high crit rate, because the main damage from this skill is going to be that soul damage. If they're frozen, that's where you're going to be wanting to use it. So the skill gem set effect from here isn't too bad to do, because it gives her a 10% chance to instant kill an enemy if she lands a crit. And seeing how this is AoE, you have roughly a 50-50 chance, if she crits on everything, to instantly kill something. So this is going to be a red, orange, and violent for physical damage, crit rate, and speed, so it's not a bad skill gems to put on there anyway. The effect is a chance to instant kill something too. This is going to be pretty nice. Now let's take a look at her passives, which are going to be pretty OP. So going over that one, the first one is she's immune to frostbite and freeze effects. So this is somewhat typical if you compare it to, say, the epic tank Skady. He's also immune to these type effects and stuff. Or if you take a look at some of the another Elune, Balder. Like Balder does blaze effects, and he's immune to blaze effects. So, you know, those type of things tend to go well together. So they apply the effect, but they're immune to it also. So in her case, she's immune to frostbite and freeze. This is good. Inflicts nature effect that causes frostbite for 2 turns to all enemies immediately upon receiving a turn. So as soon as she gets a turn, she puts frostbite, a 2-turn frostbite, to all enemies every time she gets a turn. So that means she's going to be applying these dot effects every turn that she gets. So you're going to want her with really good accuracy so she can consistently land these debuffs. So, and then she does a nature effect that causes freeze for 2 turns if the enemy already has frostbite. So this basically is kind of like her special skill, but as a passive, so it's constantly going to be just freezing and frostbiting, enemies all the time. Now, it says her debuffs never miss if an enemy's level or grade is lower than hers. So if she's attacking weaker enemies, they'll never miss. So this is good for farming. Like, she's going to be an amazing farming or unit. So because of just her constant AoEs and debuffs and everything to control the team, you can just make her just a high damage and not even care and just farm everything easily. This doesn't work against bosses or enemies with immunity. So if they have immunity, then oh well. But it's still going to be blocked by that, so it's just going to basically ignore accuracy resistance type checks whenever she's doing this if they're lower level or grade. So keep that in mind. She'll be a good farmer, but this passive is essentially her special skill, but built into a passive that she'll have every turn, which makes it very strong. Her second passive now, this one gives her the ability to have her attacks never miss if she's attacking an enemy afflicted with frostbite or freeze. In other words, they can't be evaded. So if they have frostbite or freeze, then she is going to land her attacks on the enemy. She'll get a soul effect that increases her attack by 10% whenever she attacks enemies afflicted with frostbite, or a soul effect that increases her attack by 20% if they have freeze, and this will go up to 100% total thing. So it's the same soul effect. It's just that if she attacks, basically what this is going to be is if she attacks somebody and they have frostbite on them, then she gains a 10% attack increase. If the entire enemy team already has frostbite on it and she attacks one of the AoEs and she does that, that's a 50% because it's 10% per 5 enemies. That's going to give her a 50% attack bonus as a soul effect, which means it can't be stripped off or it can't be removed. It's just going to always be there. If they're frozen and she does that and she does her AoE against 5 units that are frozen, then she gains 20% per hit, so that's 100%, which caps it out right away. Whereas if she did it if they just had frostbite and no freeze, then she would only get a 10. Now if it's a mixture of it, then whatever, but it's going to be pretty easy for her to cap this passive off very quick, going up to 100% boost to her attack, and it's a soul effect, so it'll constantly be there. So you can pretty much be assured that this is going to be affecting her almost from after her first or second turn. She's going to have it maxed out from then on in the match. She should be having this passive just adding to her damage. Third passive now, the third one comes in by, this one is another soul effect type passive, which again means it can't be removed. She gains a soul effect that increases her crit rate by 10% whenever her frostbite or freeze effects are removed. So if there's a cleanser on the enemy team and they cleanse off the debuff, then she gains a 10% crit rate buff as a soul effect, or if her debuffs are nullified by resistance or immunity. So if you have something like a Trent that just keeps buffing up his skill 2 to constantly keep immunity on your team to avoid her frostbites and freezes, then she's just going to keep increasing her crit rate instead. So it's basically, she's like saying, oh, you don't want to be frozen or you don't want to have dots on you. All right, fine, I'll just have higher crit rate and I'll just keep hitting you hard. So this way she keeps, even if she doesn't get the bonus from her second passive to increase her damage, she's still going to get 100% crit rate, which just means she's going to be critting all the time against you. So this goes up to 100% again, so she can have no crit rate and she can still gain high crit rate from this. So if you expect to be fighting a lot of enemies that remove debuffs or that do that, then you don't have to worry about high crit rate, and you can just build pure damage on her. But if you're going against a team that maybe has that doesn't have a way to cleanse things off or perhaps low resistance, then you don't need to worry about this because she'll be getting crit rate anyway from her second passive. Well, she'll be getting a lot of attack, but her debuffs will be the main form of your damage then, because it's just going to be a DOT style debuff that ignores defense. So gear for her, she is a debuffer, so you're going to need really good accuracy with her. She starts with 0 accuracy, so she doesn't get anything from that. So you're going to want to get good accuracy on her from gear. Full moon set, of course, is going to be the easiest way to do that. Debuffer set will be nice. But anything that can give her high accuracy. Same thing for Dimension Slate. For her, you're going to need to focus on the accuracy type things just to make sure she has that initial accuracy. You want her to be able to land as much as she can, even though her passive does give her the ability to not miss or or have debuffs evaded, or she gets a bonus even if they are. You still want to have her on good accuracy. You're going to want to do that because you want those debuffs to land. You don't want her to miss them and then buff in some other way. You want her to constantly be landing debuffs as much as possible. So you're going to need, she does have decent physical and magic defense, but you're still going to need to focus on those since she is going to be an AoEer, and really the most common meta type unit for defense is Artemiels. She's going to be revenged against all the time unless she can keep a freeze effect on an Artemiel. She's just going to keep getting revenged against constantly by that Artemiel. So you're going to need to have her on a good type of defense, or you're going to want to bring her with something like a Mei and just make sure she's the lowest HP on your team, so that way Mei protects her. Then you can do that and just have Mei soak up the damage instead. But she will be a good killer for the Artemiel if she can land those freeze effects, say, on the Artemiel, or even the frostbites, and then with her ultimate skill dealing the soul damage equal to a very high amount of his HP. So that's going to be helpful. She'll be really good to be paired with several Elunes. Another legendary to pair her with is going to be Elucia, and that's the one that came with Artemiel during the Summoner 4 crossover event. But Elucia is going to be very good Elune to run her with, because her ultimate skill does a full strip, and if she strips, it does a freeze effect, an AoE freeze effect. It's only one turn, but it is an AoE freeze effect. So this means like you can have an Elucia tune to move first before the Reda, and you can have the Elucia move first to do a full strip and then freeze effect. So you have the Elucia on high accuracy to make sure she lands it, higher speed than Reda. You have her move first, AoE strip, freeze, and then the Reda immediately can go in with like an ultimate skill, or she can do her skill 2 or something and then just apply frostbite to everybody for that, and she'll just be able to do massive damage or something with that, because everybody's going to be frozen, everybody's going to have frostbite. She'll be able to just go in there. So she'll be a good pairing with that, because then you don't have to worry about immunity, because the Elucia can just strip it off instead. So she's going to be a very good pairing with her. Another good pairing to do with her, you're going to need some type of AoE strip if you want to run her effectively. So Elucia is probably going to be your better one, but anything that does AoE strip is going to be good. Catherine can work because she does do an AoE strip as well, so she can work just to help make sure nobody has immunity. Trent is another one, is probably going to be one of your better strippers, just because he doesn't care about resistance or accuracy for his strip. He just strips everybody, so that will make it easier for her to land the debuffs, because you don't have to worry about it missing on somebody on a strip where you might have to worry about a resistance or something with Elucia. Other Elunes that would be working really well with her, and something to keep in mind for potentially UGD Arena, is going to be things like Skady and what's her name, Amaror. They're going to work well with her because they do tons of AoE or whatever frostbite and freeze effects. Also, they do tons of them, and they're going to work really well with her, especially like if you build up a tanky Skady, then he can just AoE provoke the entire team absorb all the damage and just keep them provoked, and then she can just go in there and just do massive amounts of damage. And they're going to be getting constant frostbite and freeze effects anyway from the Skatie's passive and stuff. So you combine that with the Honor Roar, and that's also doing constant AoEs, and you have a very devastating team, especially just like a 4 team with, say, a Skatie, an Honor Roar, an Lucia, and a Reda. You're going to have a very scary team in terms of CC, and you can throw in, just for extra measure, you can throw in, you know, whatever else you want, like the Away just to give you those high buffs and stuff for that high amount of attack and defense. 2, you throw Away in there or something, and you've got a very effective team for destroying enemies and keeping them CC'd while just destroying them with soul damage. So just some things to keep in mind, or ways to build a user that's going to be pretty effective. Teams like that are going to be effective even against, you know, higher level players and stuff, just because the amount of CC that she's going to bring with the soul damage that she's capable of doing just from the frostbite effects, plus the soul damage that she does from her ultimate skill is just going to be really nice. So difference, kind of, if you look at some of the effects, you have like a bleeding effect is 8%. You can see here in the help. Bleeding effect is soul damage equal to 8% of their max HP as soon as they get a turn. It can't exceed 3 times the attack of the attacker, so you want good attack just to make sure, but that's 8% of their max HP, which is quite a bit. Bleeding effects you can stack up to 3 times too, so you can have 3 of them on there. So that means 24% of their max HP every time they take a turn with bleeding. Poison damage, this one is a different type of DOT, but it's also soul damage, again, equal to 50% of the attack of the caster when they receive a turn. So this one doesn't do as much damage, poison doesn't, but it's 50% of the caster's attack. So blaze effect is 15% of the current HP, so as the HP of the target goes lower, blaze does less damage. Otherwise it's pretty close to like that, to the bleed effect. It's just that it does more damage initially, but then it has diminishing returns as their HP goes down. The damage that it does, since it's based on current HP, also goes down. When you look at the frostbite effect, though, it's 15%. This one deals 15% of their max HP if soul is not used during their turn. So when you apply the frostbite, it's a good soul damage type skill, but they can't use like their skill 1s. They have to use something that consumes souls. It has the same thing, can't exceed 3 times the caster. So, but the reason that she's good with this, even though it's something that they can avoid just by using something that uses soul, is that she also freezes. So when she freezes, that prevents them from doing anything, which means on their turn they don't use soul. So if she frostbites them and then freezes them, when they get a turn, they're taking 15% of their max HP as damage, which is a lot. So that's good because they didn't do anything. Now the freeze effect also prevents actions and 5% additional damage per hit when they are hit. So this means that AoE effects or anybody else attacking them gains 5% additional damage to them because they're also frozen. So this is a very good combo. So when you frostbite and then freeze something, you're frostbiting it, meaning that you're forcing them to use souls. So if it's a player playing, then they're going to be forced to use souls. If it's a AI playing, the AI is going to do whatever the AI does, and it might not use souls at all. So, but this is on their turn. So meaning like whenever an Artemil revenges, that's not his turn. That's just him revenging on a passive, which means don't expect to throw frostbite on an Artemil and then just keep attacking something, and every time it revenges it takes damage. That's not how that works. It has to be on their turn. So you can do this to the Artemil, and if the Artemil doesn't use soul, which it shouldn't, most of the time it's not going to be using soul because it's not going to revive anything, or it's not going to need to buff itself most of the time. So but you can put this on there and just keep it ticking away as damage to the Artemeal, because whenever it attacks on its turn, it's going to be taking 15% of its max HP as soul damage. So it's a good debuff for an Artemeal, and if you combine that with like a zombie effect from a Mikazuki or something, then even if you have the zombie and frostbite on them, when the Artemeal does attack, it's not going to be healing, it's just going to be doing more damage to itself. But then if it does use its skill to heal itself, then it'll just kill itself because of the zombie effect. Anyway, those are like just a quick kind of thing of some of the different DOTs, but why Frostbite and Freeze are going to be pretty good. So anyway, something to keep in mind, she seems like a pretty strong debuffer. She seems like she's going to be annoying. You're going to want to bring things like immunity or cleansers or something with you to avoid these debuffs. So be careful and be ready for her. Expect to see her a bunch as people start getting her and building her up. So start expecting to see her. Don't be surprised if she's going to be everywhere. She seems like she's probably going to be a pretty meta defense type Elune, just because of her passive, her first passive that basically does what her special skill does. So expect to see her pretty common later. She should be a pretty normal type defensive unit starting pretty soon, just because she's going to be pretty hard to deal with for most people, as they're not going to have a way to keep immunity up. So but kind of in that regard too, as people get the trends or get other things like just anything that'll provide immunity or cleanses constantly, then expect her to kind of not stay around as long as, say, like the Artemeal and Reapers have. Expect people to use her effectively. If they're high level, they're going to have ways to use her effectively, and they're going to be doing combos with her, like with the Lucia and stuff. But some of the mid-game players, they'll start to try to use her because she's really good, but then it's not going to be as effective, so they'll probably go back to something else instead. So, but expect a boom of her, especially right away, because she is going to be really strong, and she is going to be strong later game too, if you have the gear and you have the rest of the team that you can build to go with her. Anyway, that's going to be it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thank you.